Hi guys, it's my pleasure to have Christian with us today to talk about how to overcome the fear of public speaking. Christian was a lecturer in several universities in Hong Kong, and he's been teaching business and corporate communication since 2003. He's currently the founder of Peak Communication. Christian Masset, welcome to the podcast, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to run this past you and see how it stacks up. So I look up on the medical term for fear of public speaking. There's a medical term called glossophobia, and it's an official term used to define our fear of public speaking. And according to a lot of research, apparently it affects up to 4 out of 10 people.
I think it's regrettable, and I think it's a very good news from a market point of view. Let me be a bit cynical. No, actually, I was affected by glossophobia when I was a student. And I have a little story about that I could quote if you like.
Please tell us about it. My first
Sure.
question for you was, I was going to ask you about your first public speaking experience.
Exactly. So it fits extremely well. Well, I was at university and a group of students had organized an event. And funny enough, this event was about investment in China. And we have to keep that in mind. It was in the late 90s. I was part of the organization, and I was supposed, as my other colleague students were organizing, being on stage, I was in among the audience, and I was supposed to be the one daring to ask questions to this table of CEOs of large French companies who had already invested in China. So any question, and of course it was all choreographed. Someone comes to me with a microphone, and I had a script question. There were 200 people in the room. It was very impressive, very, very official. And as I grabbed the mic and started to ask my question, bizarrely, I did not recognize my voice. And I started, in a split second, started to panic. But a lot of eyes were on me. So I read the question and everything was fine. But it was my first panic attack in public. Probably nobody noticed. I asked afterwards, did you notice? And they said, no, it was okay. The question was clear. So that was my first shot at public speaking. And from that moment on, I realized something had to be done. So
Do you remember the question that you asked the audience?
the question, I forgot. Can you imagine? I think it was on the French car manufacturer Peugeot, who was one of the French large joint venture, still existing apparently, and it was set up in Wuhan. That's why Wuhan is a huge car manufacturing center. I forgot what was the question, but what I do remember is that afterwards, I just had the opportunity through members of my family to be trained with a former actress. And it was a lady very well known at the time, playing tragedy in the Comédie Française, one of the state theater in Paris. And she was retired and she was training executives to speak. And I had an immense privilege because I've been introduced to her. I had the immense privilege of starting my long journey to public speaking and appearing in public with a stage actress. And some of the things I learned, I'm still using today. Some of the things I learned with her, such as how to enter a room, let's say for an interview, right? A large room, big table, 5 people. And this is where I learned that the interview starts from the moment you appear. You have not even opened the mouth. How to enter a room with ease and confidence. All those things I'm now using with my students. With the people who work with me.
Your story resonates very well. I remember the first time that I had to do public speaking, and I was in my second year of my university degree in Australia. I moved to Australia for about a year, and after my first year of study, I actually chose the wrong major. So I was doing actuarial studies. I realized that I chose the wrong major, so I made a pivot to go and study marketing and management. I just thought, I would choose the far end of the spectrum to do something a bit more creative than pure maths. But what I had not realized was that marketing actually requires a lot of public speaking, and you also have to do a lot of impromptu ideas sharing. I still remember, and like you said, my first appearance was just very bizarre. I was put in a group, and we had to present a marketing project. And then I was standing next to, a bunch of these people, and they're all very eloquent, articulate, and most of them are native speakers. And while I was doing quite well back in my home country, Hong Kong, and I realized that I respond a lot slower when people ask questions, and whatever words that come out from my mouth just wouldn't make sense. I would stutter, I'll get sweaty palms, and people used to hand me tissues while I'm speaking. And before I finished my presentation, they would have finished the tissues already. So it's quite embarrassing when I first started.
I'm sure, but you see, your story and mine show something to our audience. We can have very hard beginning, and with a bit of work, with enough work, we can be extremely comfortable to speak under any circumstances. And this is true for everybody. It's just a matter of determination.
So tell us, Christian, what are the common challenges when we are thinking about public speaking?
The common challenges would be for people who do not necessarily have enough confidence at the beginning. They may have an excellent memory, but then the simple fact of being seen, and this is very important. I can have another story later on about being seen. People are afraid to forget what they have to say and look stupid. I would say this is the main obstacle, the main roadblock, because it's embarrassing, and not only embarrassing, because then draws in the mind, in the brain, a lot of material, such as probably shame, which actually have nothing to do there. But there may be a connection with that. So a lot of embarrassment is a social issue, actually. And the more people, the more frightening it can be. So I think this is probably the main roadblock.
Yeah. And to your point, I've tried many different ways when it comes to public speaking. I try scripted, non-scripted. And what I realize is that people often, they try to follow the guidebook, the system. And like you said, what people sometimes forget to realize is that, you know, their fear might be coming from a different place. It could be fear of judgment because we were being dismissed as a child, or we're being put in this educational system where we're getting a lot of criticism and non-constructive feedback from our peers and from our teachers. And over time, it sort of shape our belief system and making us feel that, you know, we're insignificant, we don't have a point of view, we don't have a perspective, we aren't good enough to show up when we're asked to speak in public.
All this is true. I agree with all those factors. And at the same time, realized how my life would have been if I had not been on this track, on this path, basically, because the fact of getting trained in different ways gave me magnificent opportunities until today, for instance. But before that, gave me a lot of opportunities. You know, I have worked many years in volunteering in Hong Kong for charities, environmental NGOs. And this is where I learned a lot. But at the same time, I was trained before. So had I kept this fear of public speaking, it would have been impossible to be at the forefront of it was a small NGO, but we were invited on TV, on radio, at the Legislative Council. I have a recorded track, the last one of me at the Legislative Council, because it was recorded by the government. So it can be a major roadblock to not only to self-expression, but also to professional promotion, to professional evolution. And this is on this that I'm trying very hard to communicate with a lot of people. It doesn't cost much, but it brings so much, really. I mean, there's just good news about it.
I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier so that we can give some practical tips to people who are listening to this call. So you mentioned about in a job interview setting, the interview starts the moment we step inside that boardroom or step into that interview room,
Absolutely.
Right? Can you share with us what are some of the things that we shouldn't do when we enter into that meeting room?
Let me start first with what we should do. So when we enter that boardroom, the first thing as we close the door is to look at all the people present and smile. Smile as you walk toward seats arranged for you. Smile and look at absolutely everybody. There is a simple reason for that. The person at the center may not be the decision maker. The person at the center is the one organizing the meeting. And what has happened in many cases, the real decision maker is on the side. And it can be far from the center because for just logical reason, first are the people concerned by the department at the center, right? So it's important to look at everybody and smile to everybody. Very few people dare to do that. But I tell you, the number of points gained is enormous because it shows that you understand the rule of the game. So this is one first thing. The other thing that
Christian, can I jump in and
Sure.
ask you, smile with our mouth closed or with our mouth open? Should we show our teeth or
No,
not?
not too much. Let's say maybe with the mouth closed. But it's about displaying confidence and ease. The message you send is, I'm here and I'm fine. And I'm happy to be here, by the way. But not too much, because this is exaggerate. It could be exaggerated. And if it is exaggerated, it's already wrong. So it's already unnatural. So the question is to remain natural, but to display genuine confidence and ease at that moment, because we all know it's very stressful.
So go in the room with no judgment and make sure we exchange eye contact with everyone in the room. Absolutely. And don't make an assumption that the person sitting in the middle is a decision maker.
That's right. Absolutely. And then comes the classic question, which is a very natural thing. It's universal. Please tell us about yourself. What is obvious is that everybody knows already. But the question is, because if you're here, it means that they have read your resume. They already have a fair idea of who you are. But the real question is, what approach are you going to choose to talk about yourself? So it's not going to be a chronological thing. Never, ever. It's boring and it's in the resume. Everybody has read it. It's about the theme. Basically, it's about the theme. It's thematic. That means I'm here regarding so there are many ways to bring this, but it's about the job, the passion you have for the sector, what you have already done. But in a nutshell, basically, it should not be more than 2 or 3 minutes and never be too long.
Right. Okay.
Never.
Yeah, such an easy question, but I think a lot of people actually struggle to answer this simple question, like who are you? Why are you here in the first place? Sometimes I like to strike back instead of feeling the pressure that I have to answer to that question straight away. Sometimes I hit back to the audience and just ask him, is there a particular section that you would like me to highlight?
This is a plan B, perfect option, of course.
Because like you said, you never know who's in the room, and sometimes, and I think for me, the best interview are the ones where you kind of make it more like a conversation rather than Q&A, and it also puts me at ease that whatever that is coming out from my mouth, is speaking in their language is what they want to hear. So,
exactly. But let's say right from the moment you arrive in the room, it's difficult to dictate the rule of the game at that very. Let's say answering and then confirming. Actually, a good strategy also in the case of a job interview is to confirm whether you have answered the question appropriately. And this is great. That brings what you're talking about. That means the conversation aspect back and forth, so that you want to make sure. And this shows also a lot of maturity in terms of your communication.
And while we are on job interview, Christian, at the end of the interview, we're often asked by the interviewer, do you have any questions for us? Do you have any advice and suggestions for candidates?
Plenty. Okay, one of the questions is, what would be the first skill that would be immediately required for the job? What would be the main skill that would be presently, immediately required for the job? Because we can consider that there may be a situation in evolution. You are already inquiring about, okay, if I'm getting in, what do you want me to do? Immediately, what would be the main skill? Singular. And that already uncovers a lot of things, because if the structure is in an evolution, they may ask you, we would especially like you to focus on this. And this is great. The second question, how would you rate my performance so far, my interview so far? That opens the box to additional questions. And it's a very nice way to confirm whether you're on track or not. And also shows a certain amount of guts to ask that, and therefore that can be put in the credit of maturity. And
Christian, would you say the second question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
The second question would depend on the cultural setting, because I guess we're based in Asia, and the openness in terms of getting feedback in meetings and getting like in-person feedback is more prevalent in the West than in the East.
You may be right.
Is that something that we can just apply? Is that
It depends. If it's an international company, local company, Hong Kong based, if it is international, the culture is international. So I would not hesitate to recommend to ask this question. If it is a local company, not necessarily international, there might be another way to ask, or simply another, how would I be rated? How would my first month in the company would be rated? This is also quite daring, but it makes sense. It makes sense because it shows that you have enough motivation to work there and you want to do what is right.
I love what you said, Christian. And also from a psychological point of view, it's almost like, you're making the audience visualize that you're already there.
Exactly.
That you're very high Christian, and this is your team member, and this is their imperative, their skill set that you want them to build in the first month, and this is how you're going to be measuring Christian whether he or she is on track.
Totally. So there are more questions, but let's say here we have three possibilities, which shows quite a confident level of willing to be engaged in the organization. And this is what the people are waiting for. That's what they're expecting.
I used to struggle with this a lot because I spent a lot of my career within consulting. Consultants, they're hired to be there to provide answers. And I used to struggle to say or to admit that I don't know something. Is that a common issue with the people that you come across?
I had a few clients working in consulting companies here in Hong Kong, one of the big four. I have not encountered this issue. And yet, from a broad perspective, professionally, I think it's never wrong to say, excuse me, but on that specific issue, I don't know. I think it's a trust building thing. And we are not supposed to know absolutely everything. And definitely not at this time and age where things change so fast. But admitting that I cannot give an immediate answer, a professional answer, I would need a little time to get back to you and tell you exactly what the situation is. I think it's very professional. I would trust someone who says that. I don't know how it could be perceived because I've never worked in the consulting industry in Big Four, but I would encourage people to be very honest and frank about that for obvious reasons.
I think how that came about for me was I still remember my first consulting job that I had when I moved back to Asia. I was being put on a project, and the client was in civil service. And I remember walking into that meeting, and the project sponsor was probably in her 40s or 50s. I remember, like, during the first 10 minutes, she basically said in my face, and the general manager, the person who hired me, was also at that meeting. And I was being put on that project as a project manager. And basically she said she doesn't want me on that project. And the reason she gave at that meeting was that I looked too young. And because of my age, I didn't qualify to be a project manager. And I think that incident had haunted me for several years, that I had to try to look more mature or look more intelligent than I was. And that might have linked to, I guess, the example that I've shared with you just moments earlier. With regards to whenever people ask me questions, I always had this pressure that I had to give an answer, or I look more mature, I look a lot older than my actual age. I even grew a beard. Despite being Asian and I'm quite hairless, I try to grow a beard after that. I went to shops and bought night suits. Just I changed glasses, for example. Just just to add a bit more weight and age to my actual age.
Yes, I'm still surprised such bias still persists, and at the same time, I've got a feeling this is evolving. But then I understand the frustration of being confronted with that. But then it's a matter of time, and mentality can evolve. But yeah, it's really frustrating. I empathize completely.
Yeah, to take it back, I'm really grateful for these experiences. I think probably many experiences you have had in the past. I think having these surprises sometimes just shape like who we are. It makes us more resilient in times of adversity. You touch on anxiety. You asked a question and you felt that you had panic attack, but no one noticed. I think a lot of people also have that anxiety, a heart, keeps pumping when we're being put on the spot to answer something or to give a big presentation.
Right.
What tips can you give to these people? How can they calm their nervous system down?
Yes. There are three things, but let's start with one before the event. Okay. there are some techniques now used in sport. And since we are at a time of Olympic Games, we can talk about it. I have some friends doing sport at a reasonably high level. And the coach, he's a tennis coach, basically a French guy. He used to work in Hong Kong. And as he was coaching his students, he was spending a lot of time to visualize. So it was mental preparation. Mental preparation is very well known nowadays in sport, professional sport or semi-professional. Mental preparation, it's about visualizing. So for someone who has to deliver a speech, weeks before, every day, spend 15 minutes visualizing a perfect success in your own terms. That means you on stage, the audience facing you, and everybody captivated, you having a good time, people uploading, people coming to you, asking you questions, smiles on people's face. Visualize, visualize, visualize. It would take a long time for me to explain why visualization works, but I'm sure many of the people listening to us know already that. So visualization do work. For one simple reason, it's a self-imposed program that leads you to success. And the human brain is so complex. It's just an app called success in any way, and it's very powerful. The first thing is visualizing. Already this calms your nerves days or weeks before. Second thing, if during the speech some things come up that makes you uncomfortable, breathe. You breathe before you enter the stage and you breathe during. And if you, for instance, take 2 seconds in the middle of your speech, nobody will notice anything. And this lowers the heartbeat. Lowering the heartbeat, it lowers the hormones, the level of stress hormones in the blood. This is what we want. The third thing that can be done is simply to pause. It may be more accessible to people with a bit of experience, but just stop and talk to the audience. All right. I've already covered these points and these points. At this stage, I would like to ask, would there be any question? And this stops the pressure immediately. In a split second, the pressure goes down and people are happy to have an opportunity to express themselves. And then if in the brain there was some possible drama issues, there's no more drama issues because you just stop talking and you give the opportunity to the audience to talk. Okay, so it may last a few minutes, 1 or 2 questions, and then you resume and you realize that everything is just perfect.
Love this 3 simple tips you just share, Christian. So have a very powerful, positive visualization. Yes. I know a lot of athletes do it. Yeah. And having that, mental image in our head can really has the power to sort of transform our brain. So for me, every time before I walk into a big presentation, I don't know whether you will agree with this, but I do a couple of things. I visualize that, things are not going to go according to plan. Things will happen, like you said, to your second point. Yeah. Things are not going to go according to plan. Projector might not work. The audio might not work. Someone might object and have a question in the audience. They might challenge me. But I'll tell myself that's okay because I'm not aiming for perfection. I'm just there to serve. I'm there to share my story. And what I realize is that just by lowering your internal expectation helps you build your resilience. So already when I walk into a big meeting or workshop, I would obviously preparation is important. You got to plan ahead, and for the workshop and for the agenda, you got to interact with the audience. But I also have this level of expectation where, okay, I've done the best I can to prepare for the materials, but I also need to allow myself to have that agility and that flexibility to react if something doesn't work.
Yes.
Right. And like you said, if something doesn't work, I'll breathe. And then I'll ask the audience for inputs.
Exactly. Now, when you talk about logistics and all those things, I put it in a different section because for me, it's about responsibility and logistics. So, of course, anything can happen, but I'm trying to if I go to a venue, I'm trying to come with a complete suitcase of cables in order to be sure everything should be in the suitcase. I mean, all the solutions should be in the toolbox and everything will be fine.
Yeah. Your preparation is half of your success.
Absolutely.
So how can somebody build up their public speaking muscle over time? You've come a long way, and you just share at the start of our conversation that you had a bit of a panic attack when you're being presented to 200 senior executives. But for someone who is sort of early in their journey, or they've been working in back-end roles now. They've been asked to do maybe more sales and more customer-facing type role. Like, what are some of the actionable steps that these people can take?
Actionable step one is grab any opportunity to speak and practice, 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 practice. The more, the better. And yet, in order to avoid pitfalls and disappointments, talk to a good coach and hire a coach. I tell you what, I don't want to do crass self-advertising, but there is a simple fact. A coach will save you time. So if you do not have much time, and if you go, for instance, in a job transition, and you need to be ready by a certain date, learning with someone, practicing with someone, I prefer to say, practicing with someone will save you weeks and months. So this is the first thing. Now, once you may have done that, practice, 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 because you're not going to see your coach for 6 months. Coaches would love that, but it may not happen. So once you have already foundation, this is very important. Once you already have a foundation, practice, practice. Go anywhere where you have an opportunity to speak. Even if some people say, oh, would you like to deliver? I know you want to meet people. Do you want to? You say yes, whatever it is. Even talking to kids. Kids are actually an excellent audience. Practice, practice. Never dismiss an opportunity to speak.
So grab as many opportunities as we can.
Absolutely.
Even if the audience are children. I actually love speaking to children. Children they don't judge. They just ask you lots of curious questions that grown-ups are too afraid to ask.
They are a great public. I had an opportunity, I've done that for a few years. At the Academy of Gifted Children, I was introduced to animate some workshops there, and I did that for 4 years, once a year. And they were absolutely fabulous. At the age of, started at 11, 12, 13, and they learn extremely fast. Yeah, it's fun.
I was recently invited to a kindergarten to talk about my occupation. And like you, we wear many hats, and one of the hats I wear is being an author and writer. So I was being asked to present about my occupation to about 30 K1 students,
Nice.
And it was quite an interesting experience. And I almost did like a mini workshop with these minions, these kids, and I introduced about my career and what led me to writing. But I also told them, everyone could be a writer, and writing is a great tool to help us process our thoughts, our emotions. And sometimes by writing, we could also do a lot of self-reflection. And it also helps us to look into our belief system and look into our past. And the more we do that, it's almost like what Steve Jobs said. We can't connect the dots by looking forward. We can only connect the dots by looking backward. So writing has had a very profound impact on me. And I just want to echo on the point where you mentioned. And also the second point that you mentioned about hiring a good coach is very important too. And I feel like sometimes society and external pressure make us believe that we have to be good at everything. But really, we don't need to be experts in everything. We can have general knowledge. We can be a generalist across many different domain areas. But like you said, if there is an important job interview, if there's an important board presentation, sometimes it's better to lean in with expert and get their help. And one thing that I like to use is, asking myself, what is the upside and what is the downside of this? If it's just a normal presentation, if something is not of significance, yeah, sure, I can just wing it. I can do it on my own, and I can sort of self-taught and go through this learning journey. But if Christian, you're about to do a big board presentation, or you're going to step into a big job interview, I think, like you said, hiring a coach and, just within that hour, getting all the insights and advices that it has taken someone like you, Christian, like over 30, 40 years to accumulate, but you can have that download over 60 minutes. For me, that's a bargain.
That's a good way to put it. I totally agree. I mean, once you have been trained with a person who really can guide you, it's an enormous confidence building thing. For the day, you have to show up. Absolutely. Yeah.
Christian, I always end our conversation with a question that our guests likes to ask the next guest without knowing who that person is. What's that one question you want to ask the next person?
What would be the best marketing strategy to promote education? That's something that is on my mind.
What would be
best marketing strategy today in Hong Kong to promote, let's say, to promote training? because I'm thinking about that every day of every month for the last 6 months. And there are ideas that I'm digging, that I'm exploring, because we cannot always repeat the same message. This is the reason number one. The reason number two, technology is evolving so fast that people expect some bells and whistles and some new ways to be talked to. And I've adopted, in the course of the last 4 months, I've adopted 3 or 4 new softwares. It's fun. I'm very happy about that. But I think this could help a lot of people in Hong Kong who are like us, proposing training in all sorts of things, ideas, sharp ideas on how to market this, how to market oneself.
Okay, how to promote training for education.
Yes, totally. Yeah, it's the same, except that education, we tend to focus on younger people, and training for more mature professionals. But yes, exactly.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. I think so. My belief is, if we have better self leaders on this planet, we'll have better, we'll have better children, and by having better children, we have a better future, because we have better leaders in the community.
Fully agree.
And just before we wrap this up, Christian, I also want to let the audience know that if you're listening to this conversation, Christian and I will be doing a masterclass to help people to become a more confident public speaker. More details will be available on LinkedIn, and it will be available next Friday. So if you guys are looking to improve your communication skills, trying to build up your speaking muscles and become more confident, getting your next job interview, or, getting that job promotion, please remember to check out our LinkedIn. Christian, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I learned a lot from you today about how we could speak more confidently in public. And thank you so much for sharing the bells and whistles about the small things that we can do so that we can show up confidently when we walk up for our first job interview. Your point really hit home about not judging about where people are sitting, and really treating people equally and smiling authentically. And the 3 things that you mentioned about how we can calm down our nervous systems, have a very powerful and positive visualization habit, go back to breathing, which can slow us our heartbeat, and also don't remember to stop and try to improvise and listen to the audience when things don't go according to plan. Christian, pleasure to have you today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Aaron. See you soon.
See you soon.